From this day forth I swear vengeance. I shall hunt down your kind and murder them into extinction. Oh my god, what's happening to my face?
That's the joke! Welcome, denizens of the interwebs. Skull coming back here with a reason for y'all to go laugh and poke fun at me in the comments below. It's no secret that I like Pokemon. Hell, the majority of my commentaries are focused on that. But I do have other interests as well. Duh. As you can tell from the opening gag, I am a fan of Yugioh. I've been in the game for the last couple decades and have off and on again competed in plural leagues with small amounts of success, nothing to write home about. So what do these two iconic franchises have to do with each other? Well, a poketuber by the name of Birdkeeper Toby a couple months ago actually made a video comparing both series and attempted to determine which one was the better. As you can already imagine, I disagree with what the video has done. So, let's begin!
Hey Pokemon Masters, Birdkeeper Toby here!
Alright, I'm not even 10 seconds in, but I have a serious question here for any poketubers who may or may not be watching this. Why is it whenever I see a poketuber with an avatar they use their actual face for their videos, they always seem to pop up from the bottom of the screen?
Hey Pokemon Masters, Birdkeeper Toby here!
Hey guys, this is Dobbs. Greetings, Poke fans!
One of my favorite
Coincidence? I think not!
I'm sure I'm overthinking this, and my tinfoil hat is extra shiny today, but as someone who has been scoping out trying to find material, I kept coming across this. Seriously, what the actual hell?
Speaking of which, did anyone think that perfect Zygarde form looked a lot like Obelisk the Tormentor?
Are you serious? They look nothing alike! All they have in common is appearance that they're both human-shaped and horns. That's like saying Karibo looks a lot like Swirlix because they're both Pothballs.
But this ultimate battle cannot be done alone. Today's video has been sponsored by Crunchyroll. More about that later, but for now, let's get down to it.
Normally when it comes to stuff like this, I tend to skip it, with a little bit of an honorable mention in the skip screen. However, when he mentions Crunchyroll again, the placement of this advertisement will have a lot to say about, and I want to give you guys a little bit of heads up.
And in the name of keeping this a fair fight, I'm going to break this video down into 4 segments. See, how could you possibly compare two vastly different series? Well, they each have a manga, they each have a TV show, a card game appearances, and of course, video games. So I'm going to pit these 4 elements against each other, and that is how I'm going to determine who is better.
So we've got 4 potential categories to determine which series is the better of the two. An even number. If you haven't seen this video by Toby here, you can probably already guess what's going to happen. If you don't have the foresight or don't want to avoid spoilers, look away now!
Manga began in 1996, and the story follows a roster of different Pokemon characters closely following the plotline of the games. The new characters and the new Pokemon swap out every series, allowing a viewer to come in at any point and just pick up and start reading. That's of course only for the main Pokemon mangas, the Pocket Monsters Adventure manga. They did have some very experimental spin-offs, but thank goodness those were cancelled. The Yu-Gi-Oh manga, on the other hand, is very different to the Pokemon manga because it's the first bit of Yu-Gi-Oh that ever entered the world. Yu-Gi-Oh started as this manga also in 1996. Yu-Gi-Oh follows multiple protagonists in line with the TV show who swap out every few series, and the plot is essentially the same as the show.
Stopping you right there since it only applies to the original manga. When you get to the GX, 5D, ZX, and more recently the Arc 5 manga, while they have similar casts, that's pretty much all there is to it. The manga follows different interpretations than what the anime puts forth. The most recent example being that Arc 5 where Yugioh has multiple personalities in the manga, while in the show, those same personalities are different people and dimensional counterparts. It's anime. It's gonna make sense if you watch it. Now, for the original manga, just to point something out, the earlier chapters of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga were adapted into a shortly run anime series that most fans have dubbed Season 0. Technically, the version of the anime almost exclusively focused on card game is the second anime based on the manga. Only the second time around, they focused more on the events that happened during the Yu-Gi-Oh Duelist manga. There are a lot more differences between the Yu-Gi-Oh animes and the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, and there are even manga for the original Yu-Gi-Oh that had plots that were in the anime as well. Why do I bring this up? Well,
So let's compare the two. The main thing I want to talk about is Pokemon is the clear and unique style of storytelling. See, the show tells the story of Ash, it's a completely different show, we'll talk about that in a bit. And the games follow the story of, well, you, the trainer, it's an RPG. So how can you make a manga based off of the role-playing game? Well, of course, it's just the artist and writer's interpretation of really how they would play the game. So when you're playing the game, you can have the same adventure as the characters in the manga, or you can do your own thing, and most likely you will. Which makes the Pokemon Adventures manga a very unique telling of essentially the same story. And even though it's the same story that you see in the show, in the games, and even the Pokemon Origins anime, it's still told in its own unique way.
And that's why I explained there are differences between the Yu-Gi-Oh shows and their respective manga. Because there's a given fact that if you read any manga from GX and up, you'd learn the stories were made for different writers and artists. Going back to the GX manga, it was authored and drawn by Naoki Kageyama. The 5Ds manga, Masahiro Hikokubo, with Masashi Sato for the art. And for the most part, different teams of writers and artists for each manga. While the same can't be said for the original manga of Yugioh, the other 4 series have different tellings of the cast for their respective series on the manga. Something that Toby here just gave praise to for the Pokemon manga itself. But as we'll soon see, he doesn't for the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, even though he shows a screen cap from Zexal's manga. This is already making me question if he even saw the other series of Yu-Gi-Oh, both manga and anime.
Not only that, the storytelling is cute, it's concise, it's funny, it's a little bit darker than the show, but generally speaking, enjoyable by all age groups. Now let's take a look at the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, which, much like its Pokemon counterpart, is darker, but there is an issue that I found while reading it. Following the rules of a fictional card game over multiple panels, while not as difficult as it could be if it was in novel form, is still pretty tough to follow.
First, as someone who has written a lot of duels in novel form, that's BS right off the bat. Secondly, you say it's hard to follow, yet you don't provide a proper example. That little snippet there isn't a good example since it's cherry-picking one scene out of a manga and giving it out of context. You can literally do that with pretty much every form of media, and it won't give your viewers a good understanding of why you think it's complicated. Hey guys, reading duels in manga is hard, just take my word for it. And frankly, I'm not going to.
And I know you'd say, well, it's first. Really, the Yu-Gi-Oh show copied it, but that's essentially my point. The Yu-Gi-Oh show is just a more refined version of the manga. It tells the story, the same story, but better.
I've already debunked you earlier with my examples of Arc V, but let's give another example of how the manga and the shows are really different from each other. In the GX anime, the characters travel through dimensions fighting shadow duelists and a cult that was led by a person who was voiced by the same person who did Meowth's original voice. The GX manga had a tournament where the legendary planet cards were introduced to the world and were a key part in the villain's plan to revive himself. Both are clearly different plots. Now, one can make the argument that he's just referring to the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga and anime, and yes, he's correct. However, by mentioning the protagonist and cast changing, something that is prevalent in both series of manga, and by the way, and knowing that the series does that, it's still the same series, and thus all manga should be counted for this point, not just the first. So why is he doing it here and not taking into account the other Yu-Gi-Oh manga?
Whereas even though it's all the same story for the various Pokemon mediums, it's still told in a new and interesting way. I don't feel like the manga does that for Yu-Gi-Oh! And so sadly, I'm giving this point to Pokemon.
The same can be said for the Yu-Gi-Oh manga too. It doesn't matter if you feel that it doesn't. Throughout this Yu-Gi-Oh series, it does, and that's a fact. You can't ignore it. Which makes me question you more if you know what you're even talking about when it comes to the Yu-Gi-Oh manga series, or even Yu-Gi-Oh in general.
Yu-Gi-Oh! On the other hand does things a little bit differently. Instead of just swapping out some of the cast, it swaps out the entire cast every few series.
It swaps out the entire cast every series. I'm pretty sure that's poor wording on his part, but felt like to point it out.
Also, another thing that massively swings it in his favor is that you can watch all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Online right now in HD. Yes, of course, this is the part where I mention my fantastic sponsors for this episode, Crunchyroll.
This damn advertisement! Look, I understand that YouTubers with sponsors typically have to promote their sponsors, and I'm not faulting him on that. It's the placement that I'm faulting him on. In the middle of the damn video. There's a reason why you see a lot of YouTubers have ads like this at the beginning and end of a video, which he does as well. It disrupts the flow of what you're talking about, and considering that the advertisement goes on for over a minute, it really is a detraction from your video and almost made me want to click away from said video. It pulls your viewers out of what you're saying, and with the attention span of people nowadays, it can make them want to click off your video. And considering that you already brought up Crunchyroll at the beginning of your video, and considering you basically give a TLDR version of this very same advertisement at the end of the video, you're essentially making non-skippable ads for your audience. Like I said, I understand you've got a contract and a sponsor, and I don't know the details of your contract, but damn son, Crunchyroll must have you in a headlock to make you put essentially 3 advertisements in a nearly 11-minute video.
It's actually really hard to compare the video games because they are so immensely different. Pokemon started as a video game and it started off well. I mean, it became such a massive sensation that all of these other franchises spawned from it. Yu-Gi-Oh, however, did not start as a video game. In fact, Yu-Gi-Oh has been struggling to find its footing as a video game since the beginning. The plot normally follows the plot of the Yu-Gi-Oh TV show, which again, the TV show does better.
Why do you keep bringing that up against Yu-Gi-Oh? And technically I can easily counter what you're saying, since there are a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh games that don't follow the plot of the anime manga. Duelist of Roses, Spell Kingdom, even the handhelds like Tag Force and Yu-Gi-Oh Championships actually do what you praise the Pokemon manga for, allowing the player to essentially play an altered version of the story of the shows. It doesn't follow the plots exactly, and quality is a thing, but you're glossing over a lot of games here and generalizing the Yu-Gi-Oh games as a franchise as a whole.
Also, Yu-Gi-Oh is what the whole premise is based around, the card game, which in the show and manga is called Duel Monsters, although I imagine due to copyright reasons they probably avoided that one.
Duel Masters, created in 1999. Yu-Gi-Oh, created in 1996. If this was an attempted joke, I'm seriously not getting the punchline. Also, as a side note, in the original manga, it was referred as Magic and Wizards. Yeah, guess what they had to do for that?
The card game Yu-Gi-Oh is what everything is based around. This is what all their energies went into. Individual competitively used cards can go up to $150. There's a whole host of ever-changing rules, including ban lists and restricted card lists that you can only use a few of. And unlike Pokemon, which refreshes the look of the card every few sets, you can still use Yu-Gi-Oh cards from the original sets, meaning there's always a new way to use an old card.
Unless support comes out for that old card, you're not going to be able to use said card. What do I mean? Well, a lot of the older cards in Yu-Gi-Oh are vanillas, meaning they're just beat sticks with no special abilities, and their levels were always weird, along with the majority of them being pretty weak for their level by today's standards. Example, Red Eyes compared to Dark Magician, who are both level 7s with 24 and 2500 attack points respectively, versus Blue Eyes, who's a level 8 with 3000. Take into account power creep, and unless you were really skilled in making decks consisting of older cards functional in a fast-paced game slate, a lot of older cards can't even compete by today's standards.
With its holographic cards and some of the characters in the cards being memorable from the show, as well as a more edgy adult look similar to Magic the Gathering, this card game finds the perfect blend between adult and child. And that is why the card game ties the score. Wait, tie game? A tie? Are you kidding me, Berkey Toby? Truthfully, it's hard to compare these two franchises, where one has flaws, the other's merits cover it perfectly.
Yep. A tie. A tie.
We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stay tuned.
I'm ending the video here. It's just giving him another shout out for Crunchyroll. Look, I'm not gonna pretend I have a lot of love for Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. Probably more so for Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I go to a lot more tournaments, sneak peeks, and buy the manga a lot more often than I do so for Pokemon. However, with this video, I feel that there was a bit of a bias here because considering that he doesn't go into details with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Sections, more specifically the games and manga, I can't help but question if he knows more than just the original Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's not really fair because Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a lot more generations and has done a lot of that he's been praising the Pokemon side for doing. I'm almost tempted to say this video was just made for the Crunchyroll ad, but I in good conscience can't really say that, since I don't know all the details to his contract. Don't give this guy hate, but at the same time, be a little more critical with people, you know? I'm Skull Common. Have a nice day.
I shall hunt down your kind and murder them into extinction. Oh my god, what's happening to my face? This has never happened before, what the frig?